Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Hi, welcome back to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. I'm Jen Shirkani, your host. And today I want to talk about feedback after failure. And I have invited a co-host to join me in the conversation, Steve Friedlein. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, Jen.
Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks very much.
So feedback after failure. Obviously, nobody wants to make a bad decision or a mistake, but obviously the things in life that shape us most often are failures or setbacks. And it's difficult to let others fail forward, maybe you could say it that way, because we don't want anyone to fail, especially if they're working on our behalf.
Absolutely. You know, the other thing, Jen, I think it's significant that this subject is coming right after your victim virus and comfort zone commentary, because I think both of those play very closely into how do I go about giving feedback to someone who's playing that victim role, or how do I help them out of their comfort zone? So this seems like a very natural transition into this subject.
I know. And it's so hard sometimes not to say, I told you, I told you so, right?
Exactly.
But I think if we have an employee who fails and they are an engaged employee, we can't feel worse for them than they feel for themselves.
Right, exactly. And as I'm thinking about this, I think lowering their defensiveness and raising their receptiveness is really what this process is about. It's like, how do I, if there is going to be defensiveness, how do I address that initially to help them become a bit more receptive in terms of what we know we're going to need to talk about?
Mm-hmm. I know. And sometimes it's tempting to want to just ignore it or just, okay, that happened, it didn't go well, let's move on to the next thing.
Yes, exactly. Well, and I think so oftentimes as leaders, we get caught up in so many other things going on that, oh, this is a little episode we need to work on. Maybe it'll just go away. Maybe it won't happen again. And I think one of the challenges is to manage situations like this in real time while the button is still hot.
I know, but emotions can be running really high at that point.
Exactly. So diffusing that emotion, I think, right up front, and combining empathy and honesty and support are all really important in this process. And then I think we need to get into the EQ piece, which is how balanced am I as a leader when it comes to giving feedback in a situation like this? Do I tend to just call it like it is and be very assertive? Or might I sometimes be overly empathic and not necessarily get the message across that the person really needs to hear? So I need to balance what's comfortable for me with what is needed for that person.
I know. Because, yeah, right. We want to reassure them and show support for them and not make them feel bad. But on the other hand, there probably is a lesson in here that we all need to learn from.
Right, exactly. You know, typically I would say start with empathy. But if this is a situation that's been reoccurring and we've gone the empathy route, it's time to be a little more caring in an evaluating sort of way. Let's take a closer look at what just happened. It isn't the first time. How do we address it this time and avoid the same kind of challenge going forward?
I agree. I think we need to have accountability, but with mercy.
Exactly. So we really want to talk about what happened versus who failed.
I like that. So, you know, I find that sometimes just letting them talk, what was your experience of this? What was missed from your perspective of it? You know, what have you learned? What could I have done differently in this to have supported you perhaps differently? Things like that can help.
Yes, exactly. I'm kind of going back to your commentary about the victim virus
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about times that I've had to give feedback to someone who hasn't done well, who typically plays the victim. And that's kind of that poor me syndrome. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want to be empathic, but at the same time, I don't want to encourage more of that behavior. And then sometimes we get the person that's a little more aloof, and it's like, oh, it'll pass, and you need to help them come to the reality of the situation. Um, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges in providing feedback is the person we're sharing information with is never going to be the same as the time before. Even if it's the same person, the
Mm-hmm.
challenge seems more intense. And again, getting back to that, what's comfortable for me versus what that person really needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do think it's always tempting to play the blame game and identifying, what contributed beyond maybe you or them to the situation. And sometimes failure does happen without our control. Like something comes along where it's just unavoidable that it's not going to go as well as it otherwise could have. So, how do we isolate the independent components of this versus our contribution to it?
Right. So I want to help them feel safe and respected and in control. But at the same time, I want them to realize the extent to which they're in control. I don't want to take
Mm-hmm.
on responsibility for you, but I want to help you get to that point where you can overcome the challenge that you just faced.
Mm-hmm. And how about like the confidence hit that can happen? Have you had an experience with somebody who, after a failure, just lost their mojo? They just somehow were resistant to any risk or challenge because they just got so focused on failing that they played it so safe.
Yep. You know, talking about resilience here, I think sometimes we think we're moving in the right direction. Everything's going the way we expected. I'm going to meet this deadline. Everything's going to be fine. And then the unexpected happens. And so guiding someone through that unexpected experience when they're in the defeatist mode,
Mm-hmm.
I think is also really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep going back to this idea of balance. I need to make sure that I'm paying close attention to what that person is experiencing when I'm giving them the feedback. Are they taking it to heart? Are they taking it too deeply into their own level of anxiety? I think it's that being constantly aware of how my message is being received will have a huge impact on the effectiveness of the feedback I'm giving.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, if I can remind them of previous successes, and even especially if it was like, hey, this was a long shot and it still worked out great, don't forget about those times
Yeah,
so that you can rebuild some confidence in them by reminding them of historically, you've always been successful. This is a blip on the radar. And I think it's a challenge for people who might tend to be more perfectionist in their
yes, yes,
personality traits.
exactly. So you're absolutely right. Affirming their strengths. And I think the other thing, and this is maybe stating the obvious, but we all hit roadblocks.
Mm-hmm.
What matters most is what we learn from it. And so I think part of that feedback process after someone has failed is to talk about what will we do differently the next time. This wasn't the outcome we were looking for, but how can we
Mm-hmm.
use this to motivate ourselves to overcome the next obstacle based on what we just experienced?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, if it's someone in an organization, we really have to talk about how do they reestablish credibility and or trust with
Yes,
others. Because like if we just pretend it didn't happen or we say, okay, well, that wasn't good, let's move on, but we don't address how to help correct the credibility issue, either with the person
right.
or the team involved, that can have a lingering effect on everyone's reputations and careers, perhaps.
Yes, yes. I want to touch back on the defensiveness piece just a little bit. And sometimes when that takes place, it's almost like we aim to win the argument over their defensiveness. And instead, I think we need to aim to win their trust. Okay. So when they're being defensive and, well, that's not exactly how it happened, and we get into this back and forth dialogue about what really took place, we need to keep in mind that maintaining trust and respect is of the utmost importance and not get looped into their defensiveness and how to overcome it.
Not always easy. I know. It's a balancing act.
At all. Yes.
What about failing in our personal lives? We've talked a lot about failing at work, but, is there things we can do to be a good friend to somebody who has experienced some type of a failure or a setback?
I think that willingness to listen is really a top priority. And sometimes when someone has failed in a work-related situation, there are outlying circumstances that we may not know about that have contributed to that challenge. And so I think it's so important to make sure that I'm opening my mind to listening to everything that they're talking about and how that may contribute to the particular challenge that we're trying to overcome. So I always say, no matter how hard I work at it, there's always an opportunity for me to be a better listener, to be a more objective listener.
I think, too, just being there for them, right? Sometimes I'll just drop a note, like, just thinking about you. No need to respond. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. I'm here. Because I think sometimes people feel invisible or, isolated after a failure, and letting them know that they're not alone can sometimes go a long way too.
I agree. I think sometimes that's all I need to hear is that you've got my back. Okay. I can work through this, but I'm going to do it a lot more effectively now, just knowing that you thought about me during that moment.
Well, I think when it comes again back to leadership, the only way to delegate more is to trust more. And the only way to build trust is to give people room, right, to prove themselves. And that includes the risk of failing. And so we have to keep conversations objective. We have to make it safe for people to try new things, which is where they grow. And if things don't go as planned, have a contingency plan for, how we can learn from this, both of us.
Right. I think to just wrap it up too, Jen, I think anytime I go into a conversation like that, I want to invite their perspective before I offer mine. Okay. Give them a voice, and it'll reduce their tendency to be defensive. So particularly if your style has a tendency to tell and talk and right up front describe what's going on, reverse that psychology a little bit and say, I want to hear your perspective. I want to understand what took place, and give them that opportunity to speak up initially. I think it will help reduce the defensiveness.
Well, and I think if we just go back to ego and EQ again, ego is taking the emotion of the failure and letting that be in charge, being angry about it, being embarrassed about it, which sometimes then results in high energy and a temptation to want to really kind of pound on somebody. EQ is take a breath, take a minute, have a calm conversation about what happened, do a bit of an autopsy on it, and then figure out how to learn so you can grow and hopefully not repeat it in the future.
Right. I was talking with someone yesterday who was describing the intensity in their office situation and how sometimes people get together to have dialogue, and there's so much intensity that's brought into the room by each individual that the conversation goes in a direction that's not intended. So I think this is another huge piece of giving that feedback to someone who's failed, to make sure that my mindset is open and objective when I go into that dialogue. If I've been a part of a difficult situation in the last 5 minutes, find a way to bring myself back down to a place where I can be more objective.
What do you always say, Steve? The right conversation at the wrong time is the wrong conversation.
Exactly. It bears repeating.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks for joining the show today. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode on feedback after failure. Not a pleasant topic, but important nonetheless. If you have future topic ideas or you need help with a situation with a coworker or someone else that you want to get some free advice on, we'll keep you anonymous. Feel free to write into the show, podcasts@jenshirkani.com. It'll be in the show notes as well. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.